Marine, always a Marine. I was in for 10 years. I was in both World War II and Korea. I really think some of the most exciting places and the events that happened were in Korea. Everything was a little different there, of course, from the Pacific where it was nice and warm. But to start out with, I was a mechanic, fixed them up. Pilot would always say, "Would you fly it?" I'd say, "Sure." And in most cases, I was sure that I would fly it. I learned that I would never be a pilot because I built model airplanes from the balsa type up to the U-control on wire, radio control. And just before the war, I found out that I'd never be a pilot because I was showing off with my radio-controlled airplane, and I was coming zipping over the field upside down. And when I got to the end of the field, I was going to pull it up, roll it, and then go back over it. Well, when it was upside down, I pulled back on the stick. I lost about $450 worth of airplane. Well, anyway, when the war broke out, I pretty much knew that I was going to be a Marine because I had 3 uncles that were in World War II that were Marines. All 3 of them got the Purple Heart. One of them was gassed in the Argonne. I don't know if they gave disability in World War I, but my dad said, it was my dad's brother, he said that my Uncle Joe said, I did my part and that's it. He said, "I'll never work another day in my life." And he didn't. I don't know how he survived, but he didn't. I brought a couple models to show you some of those that I worked on before I go into my story. This is called the Brewster Buffalo. It's the first monoplane that the Navy got. And it was started building them in 1939. Turned out to be a very, very poor airplane. The Navy didn't build very many of them. They sent a lot of them to Finland when Finland was fighting the Russians. And the Finnish pilots really raised hell with the Russians and shot down. I don't remember anybody, Dick, you might know the count, I don't, but they were very favorable for the Finlanders. And similar to the little Grumman I'm going to show you, was a weird wide landing gear and it cranked up by hand. 1941 came the little Grumman Wildcat, and you can see the difference in the landing gear, the spread of it. I worked a lot on these, and again the landing gear cranked up by hand. Ted Murphy flew Wildcat and 28 cranks to get the landing gear up, and if by chance on letting it down you had to hold on to the handle. If by chance it slipped out of your hands, you could either break your hand or get a hell of a good bruise. And of course, you still had to operate the stick and all these other things. You could always tell a novice pilot by the way he took off. Because the airplane's flying with the cranking. I enlisted in the Marine Corps at 18. Went down to San Diego for boot camp and wasn't sure at that time whether I was going to be an infantryman or a mechanic. I knew I wanted to be a mechanic, but that doesn't mean anything in the Marine Corps, Army, Navy, I guess. But went through all the basic training for infantry, and then after that they posted a notice like in any service to tell you where you're going to wind up. Fortunately, I wound up in aviation. I was sent to North Island, and that's where I started my first encounter with airplanes, and it was this one, the little Buffalo. They started out basically with a lot of these guys that never touched an airplane, you know. This is the elevator that makes it go up and down, and this is the rudder which makes it turn, and of course I had been flying models and knew all that stuff. We got our basic training on airplanes and a little mechanical aptitude and what have you. I got in the Marine Corps in May of 1942, and my first experience of going overseas was to a little island called Palmyra. It's about 800 miles out in the ocean from Hawaii. It was 5 miles wide, 11 miles long. We had one coral strip, and we had these airplanes. It was a fun airplane to work on. I loved it. And as I say, my friend over there, Ted Murphy, he flew the Wildcat, the FM2, which was an upgraded Wildcat. And the pilots provided us with lots of work, because on that one strip, the wind was blowing the wrong direction, why, they'd flip over. And we wound up with every two we had in the air, we had one underground, and we wound up salvaging parts. We were blowing a lot of tail wheels because they were rubber, inflatable tail wheels. So then we converted to hard rubber tires in the tail wheel like they have on a carrier. These things were started with a shotgun shell about 9 inches long and an inch in diameter. You put it in a chamber, closed it, the pilot threw a switch. The gas from the shotgun shell went through a tube to an impeller, which turned the prop. I don't remember just how long it was before we ran out of shotgun shells, but that early in the war we ran out a lot of things and couldn't quite figure out what to do, so the parachute rigger made a leather sleeve which was curved to go over the end of the prop, put a long bungee cord on it, slipped that over the edge of the prop, and then stretched it out and had to get the hell out of the way, and that was just enough to spin the engine over and get it started. We did that for about 10 days, and then we got more shotgun shells. The joys of war. From Palmyra, we went back to Eva. That's the Marine Air Station in Hawaii, and the pilots were going to make the transition from the little Wildcat to the Corsair, the one that Mac flew. This was a very, very beautiful airplane. First 400-mile airplane I think we had. And as you can see, the wings are bent. And the reason they're bent is because when they designed this airplane, they started out with straight wings and a 2800 engine and a 13-foot prop. With the straight wings, the landing gear would have had to bend so long to prevent the prop from hitting the ground that they decided to do that. Guess where they got the idea from? The Stuka dive bomber. They put that little thing in there, and it was just enough to raise the airplane up to clear the prop and then shorten the landing gear. The transition from the Wildcat to the Corsair, I feel for the pilots, mechanics wasn't so bad, but they give them a manual and sit in the cockpit for a couple of days for familiarization. A couple of days taxiing around the field, and they'd say, well, have fun. And that was really the indoctrination. And but you never found a man that flew the Corsair that didn't love the airplane. As I say, we have several Corsair pilots here, and of all the things they flew, I think the Corsair was just the greatest. After we got fully indoctrinated with the Corsair, I want to go back to one more thing. Grumman built this airplane, but they weren't completely satisfied with it, so the Eastern Aircraft Corporation was going to build an exact airplane, but upgrade it. And what they did was reduce the weight by 540 pounds. To look at the airplane, you see no difference. And as I say, Murphy flew it, and both of us could never figure out where on earth they got 540 pounds out of it. They put a more powerful engine in it. They put water injection in it. They supercharged it. And water injection was the purpose of water injection was to increase the speed, the horsepower for about 4 seconds. You'd give her a shot of water, 3 or 4 seconds. That's about all, or you'd burn up the engine. And I don't know, Mac, have you ever used that? I mean, were you ever in a hurry? I mean, but anyway, first stop going out into the island was Guadalcanal at Henderson Field. It was, at the time I got there, it was pretty rough. The Seabees hadn't even put in the matting yet, which they usually put down once they leveled off the runway. We had a little bit of everything there. We had Corsairs, the Army had P-39s, P-40s, a couple of B-17s, so we had a variety of airplanes flying out of there. Air crew, ground crew don't get much excitement. Every now and then, in the evening especially, some pop little airplane would fly over and drop a few bombs. We had a name for them, but I don't remember what we called them. And now and then the Navy, every now and then the Navy, Japanese Navy or a submarine would slip in and throw a few shells in. And occasionally and rarely a sniper would take a pot shot at somebody, but the defense battalions and that would sure finish him off in a hurry. Usually wound up hanging from a palm tree because a lot of those guys tied themselves up in a palm tree. From then on, it was just a matter of island hopping. As soon as the infantry, which I was glad I wasn't in, would take another island, why the squadrons would move ahead. We moved from Guadalcanal to Bougainville. That was Torquetina Strip in Bougainville. The Marine Corps had learned a lot about ground support because that was their main activity, is to go down there and protect the ground troops. Guadalcanal, they did a real poor job and they knew it. So by the time they got to Bougainville, they had really improved their ground support activities. They'd come in at about 50 feet over our troops, our Marines, and then drop their load about 75 feet in front of the Marines, or behind the Marines. And they really did a marvelous job of protecting our ground forces. And that was, of course, one of the bywords of the Marine Air Corps was, we take care of our own, and we tried desperately to do that. Moved up the island chain to a lot of weird little islands. From Bougainville, we went to an island called Munda, and obviously all these had airstrips, and the infantry had to go in and clean them out first before we could get in there. And right next to Munda was Andanga, and it was the monsoon season, as they call it there, and mud up to your ankles or your knees almost, and it was difficult to fly, difficult to repair an airplane, especially if you were trying to do something major like change an engine or something of that nature. Our tour of duty was 2 years, and like I said, I was in 42, and in 44 I was home after 2 years of duty. So when I got to go into some of the big islands like Okinawa, Saipan, Tinian, I was home drinking beer, so I didn't get much of that, but what I got in my 2 years of duty over there was fine. After I got home and had to leave, I thought they'd never send me over again because I had done my duty, but they did. They sent me back to Hawaii. And they said that they had enough fighter mechanics out in the Pacific now at that time, so they put me in a service squadron, and we were overhauling and completely redoing our 4Ds, or what the Army would call a C-47. And what we were doing was getting R4Ds from China. They'd fly them in from China, and we'd strip them down, take all the paint off of them, completely new engines. They looked like a new dollar when we got through with them. Then we had C-46s. We called them the R4Ds. I don't know why, but we did. And we were ferrying the C-46s, R5Ds, or R5Cs to Shanghai, Tientsin, or Tsingtao for the Chinese nationalists. And so that was an island hopping trip to get over to, we had usually in the Curtis Commando or the R-45C, 4 big butyl tanks inside the fuselage to make that flight. And we were never in China more than a day or two, and then we'd turn around and fly back with a beat up old C-47. I served my time there rebuilding the Curtis Commando, too many R4s and 5s, R4Ds, and came home after serving my time and got out. I joined the reserves, which was a mistake, and I did have time enough to use my GI Bill and go to the University of Minnesota and get a degree in engineering. But in 1950, I came home from work, and my wife had a 3-cent postcard that said, your reserve squadron has been activated. I got one story before that. I don't know if I should tell it or not.
Go ahead.
Well, while I was on Bougainville, I came down with hepatitis. And they figured it wasn't something they could take care of there, so they sent me back to Hawaii, and I was there for 10 days in the Naval Hospital there getting treated for hepatitis. And the nurse that took care of me every day was from Hopkins, Minnesota. Very nice lady. She was about, I say lady, I was 18, she was 24. And I had a little portable radio, and every night she'd borrow it, or she asked me, as long as you're not using it, can I borrow your radio? And I said, sure, why not? She said, when I leave in the evening, I'll just put it back on your bedstand. Well, the night before I left to go back to my outfit, she asked me if I wanted to go to a luau and a bear party. And I said, who's going to be there? And she said, mainly hospital staff, which would be guys like Dr. Stillwell and the nurses and all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, how's tech sergeant in the Marine Corps going to get there without being exposed? She says, I'll take care of that. So she must have done this before. She came and picked me up at the hospital or the ward I was in, put 2 little ensign bars on my collar, so I was commissioned to start out with, which could have sent me to Portsmouth probably. And we went to the luau, and they had hired Hawaiians to do the luau, and it was just a super luau. And she wanted to take a walk down the beach. And I said, well, that sounds fine. I like Hawaii and all that good stuff. And we walked, half a mile or a mile, and she put down a blanket, and I said, what are we going to do? She says, I'm going to reward you for using your radio. You'd be surprised how many times I tried to lend out that radio. Anyway, getting back to after getting back to 1950, I was in the reserve VMF 213 out at the Naval Air Station, and they reactivated that, and they sent us out to the West Coast, and from there we went to Japan, and our squadron was put on a aircraft carrier, a carrier vessel escort, which is one of the small carriers. And we were in the old Pappy Boynton's old Black Sheep Squadron, VMF 214. And carrier duty was real nice. A lot of Marines didn't have that benefit. Mac, Ted, Dorney, and some of the guys here did, but it wasn't much different than good food, good living conditions. But anyway, at that time it was winter time, and we had an awful time with those Corsairs because they had never experienced this kind of weather. Difficult in starting, very difficult in starting. We finally got some engine heaters. The guns were jamming because of poor lubrication. We had to solve that problem. Some of the napalm wasn't igniting, again because of the mixture and the cold. But eventually we got all the problems solved. We went 60 days on the carrier, and then they needed the carrier for transporting another squadron. So they dumped us way above the 38th parallel in a little airport called Yanpo. And it was a nice airfield that hadn't been destroyed too much. And we billeted in a hangar that the North Koreans would have used for their aircraft. The door on the darn thing was about 10 to 12 inches thick and metal, and you could see where our rockets had indented it but not gone through it. So we flew out of there supporting the Marines that were up at the Chosin Reservoir, and again doing ground support work. We were flying 24 hours a day around the clock, and the Marines make sure they let us know at night where their positions were so that we didn't take care of our own Marines. And a lot happened. Later, the Red Cross sent a memo to the carrier and said that, of course, if you remember, we're all that age, in 1950 we had a polio epidemic. The Red Cross notified the captain that my wife had came down with polio. He called me to his quarters, and his name was Captain James Thatch. I don't know if you bomber pilots know about the Thatch weave, but he created the Thatch weave for fighter pilots. And Mac would know about it, Murphy, any of the guys that flew fighters. And super guy to be a skipper of a carrier. But anyway, his point was, this is war, and I sympathize for your wife, but there's no way you're going to get home until a ship in our convoy or fleet here goes back to Japan. So I sweated out 3 or 4 days. I had no idea what polio would do. But finally, a destroyer on the roughest day that I ever seen in the ocean was going back to Japan. So they said, we're going to transfer you to the destroyer. And I was a little apprehensive about that. So the destroyer pulled up alongside the carrier, and like I say, the sea was terrible. And they shot the line across to the destroyer and hooked up the boats in the chair and said, well, we're going to ship you across, and it's all done by hand. A bunch of sailors get on a line and pull on that thing, and I hope nobody trips. And here you go across to the destroyer. With the way the water was, occasionally, instead of the line being like this, occasionally it would go like this. And of course I got a good dunking a couple times, but I finally got over to the destroyer, and the officer of the deck says, my goodness, we've never had a Marine on board. And I could smell trouble right away. And in that ocean, if you've ever seen movies or anything of a destroyer, I don't know how those guys survived. But anyway, he took me all the way forward and said, this is where you're going to sleep. And I can't find anything to hit, but when the bow of that destroyer came down, it was just I said, no, I'll sleep on the deck, but I won't sleep here. He said, well, I got one more place for you, and he took me aft right above the screws. And again, if you've seen the tail end of a destroyer come out of the water and those things are spinning, he finally smiled and said, no, I'm just playing with you. I said, thanks a lot. Well, anyway, from that point on, got back to Japan and flew home with the Royal Canadian Air Force R5D and got back to my wife. And when I left the carrier, personnel officer gave me an envelope, and I opened it up when I got on the destroyer. There was $480 in there from the crew of the carrier, the Marines, the Navy, everybody. And of course, at that time, there was a lot of money. And was hard for me to take, to know that the way they felt about their, fellow servicemen. But I did get home. My wife was in Kinney Institute for about 4 months. She's fairly well today. She's got a lot of old age problems now, but we've been married 54 years. And I wanted to tell Norm something. When I was in basic training, and no matter whether we were doing bayonet practice or what, I could always look over at Consolidated, see those beautiful B-24s.
What kind?
Well, that's about all I can tell you about my career in the Marine Corps. It was 10 years that I don't know if I'd want to do it again or not, but I've got some awful good memories. Thank you kindly.
Thank you for sharing those memories with us. And I enjoyed your speech intensely. At the end, I just thought it was fantastic close. Good to be complimented on your choice of words. It's very seldom heard around this institution. So,